Tonight, Israel's defense minister has ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip after this weekend's surprise attacks on Israel by Hamas militants.
Israeli officials say at least 900 Israelis have been killed in the Hamas attacks. And the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza says at least 600 Palestinians have been killed as well.
Here to discuss this new war are retired U.S. Army Colonel Gerald Font, and joining us over Zoom is Javed Ali, a professor at the University of Michigan with years of experience at the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Jerry, I'll start with you. By all accounts, this attack came as a surprise, and we're talking about Israel, not a small nation with very limited means or anything like that. What happened here, and how is it that no intelligence, no one saw this coming?
Well, they are rather a small nation, but they do have a lot of capabilities. And it's interesting that this is 50 years to the month that they were surprised during the 1973 Yom Kippur War. So this strategic surprise is not new in history. So again, you have lapses where you're not making sure that all of your intelligence resources are talking all the time, but you also get lulled into there are patterns, i.e., the IRGC, the Iranian Republican Guard Corps, just met with Hezbollah and Hamas about 2 or 3 months ago. Regular routine meetings that they have, but was that the planning meeting for this? So you can get lulled into inactivity. And I know that you mentioned the 900 deaths in Israel. If you compared that to the United States with their population, that would be like having 40,000 casualties in the United States.
Yeah.
Javed, let's bring you in now. What is your understanding of what Iran's involvement here is with this issue going on in the Middle East?
So even though there is no definitive information yet, at least that's been publicly released, suggesting that Iran was indeed ultimately responsible for this, just knowing the history of Iranian support to Palestinian groups like Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and then certainly with their relationship with Hezbollah, that given the scope and complexity of this attack and the impact of it has already been discussed on the program, I just don't think that Hamas operating on its own could pull off something at this level. So I do tend to lean in the direction that the Iranians supported it, enabled it, guided it. And that is, in and of itself, is a deeply troubling aspect of an operation that has caused so much suffering on the Israeli side and the resulting Israeli attacks into Gaza as well.
And the U.S. has responded quickly, sending an aircraft carrier, munitions. What will the American role, Javed, what role do you believe the U.S. will play going forward in this conflict?
Well, already over the last 48, 72 hours, we've heard remarks from Secretary of State Blinken, Secretary of Defense Austin, the National Security Advisor, even President Biden, basically all saying that the U.S. will do everything we can to support Israel based on sort of requirements that they send to us. One thing I don't see unfolding, at least in the near term, is any type of direct U.S. military involvement in sort of a joint partnership with Israel on the ground. There seems to be no appetite for that within the White House. I actually think there might even need to be a new legal authority under U.S. law that would enable that to happen, because the current legal authorities we have in the post 9/11 world don't cover this type of threat in particular. So I think there's a lot the U.S. can do and is already doing, but I don't foresee a scenario where we get directly involved in a way that we were involved in Iraq and Afghanistan in the post 9/11 era.
Jerry, I want to get your take on that as well. In a situation like this, what goes on behind the scenes with the U.S. government as they potentially help out Israel here?
Well, you start looking at resources and where you place them. So it's all about placement and access. I concur with Javed in his assessment, except for the fact that if there are U.S. personnel that are being held by Hamas, then the responsibility for personnel recovery falls solely into the special operations world. So by having the Forward Carrier Strike Group, you bring a lot of resources and assets to that. They have F-35s, but really the Israelis have their own. So there's a lot of strike aircraft there, but they bring mission command. And it's a power projection platform, not just for aircraft, but also for special operations forces possibly. It's also a great place that if you have U.S. citizens that you have to repatriate to bring them back to there, that they can be temporarily housed and also looked after from a medical perspective. Places I would be looking toward would be Whiteman Air Force Base in Kansas. That's where the B-2 stealth bombers are. I'd be looking at Pope Army Airfield at Fort Liberty, I'm sorry, because it's been renamed from Fort Bragg, to see what aircraft are taking off from there. Another one would be NSA, Naval Air Station Oceana in Virginia Beach, Virginia, to see what's taking off out of there. Why? Because First Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta is at Fort Liberty, and Dev Group, SEAL Team 6, is at Oceana. So then also look for other resources that are being moved around the globe. Our B-52 is being moved to Diego Garcia. We already have F-35s at Al-Udeid Air Base in Qatar. Are we moving F-22s? If F-22s go into Al-Udeid Air Base, then that tells me that they're sending a message to Iran. That is a large saber to rattle. That is the world's best air-to-air superiority fighter there is. The F-35 has great capabilities. It's an information synergy platform as much as a weapon platform, but the F-22 is unmatched with air-to-air superiority against other aircraft. So those would be the things I'd be looking for, and I'd also be asking where there are 4 Ohio-class nuclear ballistic missile submarines that have been converted to carrying Tomahawk cruise missiles. I'd be interested in so far as where are they at right now.
Okay. Now, we are hearing that Israeli communities near the Gaza border are being evacuated, and from the beginning, we're being told that they should leave. Javed, do you think there's any chance that we will see Israel invade the Gaza Strip on the ground?
That is probably something within the Israeli cabinet and the Israeli Defense Force that they are thinking through the options for that, especially if there are dozens, if not more, Israeli citizens and American citizens that are being held hostage. They can only be recovered through some kind of ground operations, and those kind of operations are incredibly consuming in the types of intelligence you need to locate on the positions of people, and then coming up with the actual assault force or the teams to go in and try to rescue or recover folks. So this is going to be a very challenging aspect of the next phase of the Israeli response. And there are probably other targets in Gaza that they are thinking about striking just from the air alone, in terms of the Hamas infrastructure and networks that enabled the attacks over the weekend. So there's a lot of moving pieces to what Israel is going to do next, even in Gaza itself.
Well, retired Colonel Gerald Font and Professor Javed Ali, we appreciate you both being here tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.